All right, Jesse, thanks for being on Cote Culture. I appreciate you carving out the time to come on, share your story, share what you're up to. So let's just jump right into it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. Good to see you again. Always a pleasure. Yeah, so roughly 3 years ago, just through my own path, which is I was an Army Ranger with multiple deployments to Afghanistan. When I came home, started struggling with certain mental issues in terms of severe anxiety, depression, self-medicating a lot with alcohol, just trying to avoid life in general. I just got to this point where I just realized that I was unhappier more days than I was happy, which is not a good formula to continue your life with. And so I needed a solution, obviously. And I tried to go through the VA through traditional means. It was just a lot of people trying to push me to get on certain medications, which I wasn't really interested in doing. And no matter what I did, I just couldn't escape this dark cloud. I tried all these wellness activities, exercise, picked up a new hobby, social groups, and all of that was healthy. And on the outside, I was pretty good at pretending that I was healthy. It was just that internal, like I said, dark cloud or demon. And so I personally came across ayahuasca through podcasts, some sort of social media, and came into it as many people would, of like, what the hell is that? Like, you're going into the woods to take this extreme psychedelic, and your mind races from there. And I was not about psychedelics, especially at that point. um, but out of necessity, I ended up going there, and it really changed my life. And so that's sort of the inspiration of Heroic Hearts Project. Just through my own experience and all these amazing stories that I saw, I just knew that there was something there beyond my own stigmas, beyond that part of your brain's like, oh, this is nothing. There was something of substance there that truly changed my life in a lot of different ways. And I was driven to bring that to the veteran community, because the veteran community is struggling similar to a lot of the athletic communities in terms of they get out of their service. There's not a lot of guidance or there is support, but in very specific ways. And they're struggling with a lot of these issues. Some of it is trauma related, some of it's brain trauma related. A lot of it is just who you are, how you identify, and there's really not good options out there. And what we're discovering right now is psychedelics, as strange as that sounds, seems to be sort of the perfect thing at the perfect time for a lot of us.
Yeah, well, it's so true, and it's amazing what you're doing because I had the privilege of hopping in on one of your guys' retreats, with one of my former teammates, Dan, and a few of these Marines, and it was quite amazing. I had a relationship with mainly psilocybin and cannabis previous to this experience, but obviously expected a much deeper dive with the ayahuasca, and wow, I mean, it beat my ass the first day. They're really good, but just amazing insights, and to do it with a group of guys that are, not going through the same exact struggle that I am, but they have their own struggle, and they're facing trauma and fear and whatnot in those in those ceremonies, and it was super powerful. You know what I mean? And I can see how this is an amazing tool for. Well, for anybody, but specifically guys that go through major amounts of trauma, and then they're trying to find themselves and recreate themselves, and find that love that was once there, that seems to be maybe suppressed through fear and trauma. So I seen it firsthand, I experienced it firsthand. And what type of things are you observing with these guys, upon their return back into the real world, if you want to call it that, and just integrating what they've learned back into their lives?
Yeah, it's the whole spectrum, but fortunately, a spectrum on a positive side. It really depends on the individual and what where they came from and what they continue to have to deal with. Obviously, trauma and everybody's situation and where they're they're coming from is completely different. So there's some people that have very deep trauma stemming from childhood, and that can take a while to get over. But there's other people that just really needed that push to have that transformational aspect in their lives. And so we're seeing that, and that's good though, because it's all progress towards a certain end. It's all progress towards understanding yourself and being able to live with yourself and being able to have a healthy life with other people in it, right? And so I've seen everything from people coming back home and just taking better steps towards their own mental health, whether it's joining a gym, practicing meditation, yoga, or even just being more conscious of certain emotions, certain feelings, certain negative patterns, to complete life transformations. So we've had some vets that had a history of suicidal ideation, and they'd come from these ayahuasca ceremonies and just realize how ridiculous that notion was, just realize how much that would destroy their family and everything that they built, and that their life had value. And others, maybe not suicidal, but still come back home and just completely take the reins of their life and completely transform it. A pretty touching story, the retreat before you guys, it was this guy who's Green Beret, had been in there for 16 years, was a sniper, just by the looks of him, that traditional, like almost Hollywood-esque military guy, seen all sorts of shit, and came into the retreat and was just stone-faced, barely said a word, and came out of it just this very happy guy exuding joy. And he told us a story afterwards that for the first time since his son had been born, his son's 10 years old, that he was not worried about missing his son's bus because they were making pancakes, and he was enjoying the moment so much. And before, he would have just been in this military mode of like, no, we got to get there, this is done, blah blah blah. But this was the first time he's like, no, this is awesome, like
Amazing.
I can drive him to school, or we can figure something out. Let me enjoy this moment. And those moments are precious, and those are the moments that veterans and athletes are losing because of the issues that they're dealing with.
Yeah, that is powerful. That was one of the things I noticed the most, was just like that emotional, spiritual release. So for someone that's really, really, stiff, I guess, if you want to call it that, or, very, very, in the bubble of being conservative and reserved and I guess that, that militant type of person, to just unlock those energies and release, and, to come out and with a smile on your face and joy and find that happiness, and is amazing, because it's there's nothing else that I've seen that can do something like that. Psilocybin, can do something on those levels, but the ayahuasca, I tell you what, like, it's a different dimension of doing that in such a small amount of time. How much transformation is possible. For those who don't understand or know what ayahuasca is, do you want to maybe give just a 101 on what it is and how it's brewed, and the kind of the storyline behind it?
Yeah, of course. And real quick on a continuation of what you're saying, the whole dynamic of Heroic Hearts Project, we happen to really focus on ayahuasca right now for certain reasons, and especially just the power of it versus the trauma that we're dealing with. But it's the whole dynamic of all these psychedelics that really have these powers to heal, and that's what we're discovering now. I really don't think one is better than the other. I think it's what part of the path you're on, what your personality is. Different people just really take to different ones, and that's the beauty of what's happening right now. We're finally understanding that nature has this power to help us if we just allow it, as opposed to trying to dominate over it, or try to be more intelligent than nature has been.
Right. Yeah. Exploit it. Yeah. And appear more intelligent, for sure.
And so that's the beauty, it's like these mushrooms have been growing in the ground for, however long, and they've always been right there at our feet, and they have the power to completely change our lives, completely help us appreciate lives. On the ayahuasca dynamic, It mostly stems from Amazonian culture. So, South America, majority Peru, Ecuador, Colombia. Um, and the brew itself is a combination at its core of two plants. One is called ayahuasca, which is a vine, and that contains a chemical called a MAO inhibitor. And the other is a leaf called chacruna in the Peruvian tradition. Different cultures will use different sort of combinations, but the concept's the same. And the leaf has the DMT. So the DMT is very chemically similar to psilocybin, which is in the mushrooms. And that is sort of the traditional, stereotypical psychedelic chemical that connects you to receptors in your brain and causes that expanse of the mind. So the interesting thing about ayahuasca is the combination of this vine, the what they call ayahuasca, and the leaf allows your body to digest it, almost like an edible cannabis, like gummy or something like that.
Right.
So different sort of high or different sort of experience.
Mm-hmm.
If you were just to eat the DMT by itself, your body would not go into this sort of trip. The combination of the MAO inhibitor and the DMT allows you to go into sort of this DMT world, and you'll be there for about 4 hours, and it really allows you to explore it. It can be very trying and hard, but because you have that time, it's almost learning yourself in a completely different dimension that you can almost bring back to reality. So it comes from a lot of Amazonian tribes independently throughout these different countries. Forgot to mention Brazil as well. And it's hard to say because it's not very well documented, but it goes back thousands of years. It was these traditions of these tribes that had shaman or curanderos that were the healers of the tribe. They were responsible not only for the physical healing, but also the spiritual, emotional, mental healing of the group. And they would work not only with ayahuasca, that tends to be something they call a teacher plant, which tends to be the stronger ones like tobacco, ayahuasca, wachuma, which is a cactus. But all the different plants in the jungle, they were the ones that had the knowledge of this plant, you can take it and it can settle your stomach, or this plant can help fight infection in the wounds. And so they would be the ones, almost the early medicine men of the tribe, but also in that spiritual, mental sense. And so if there was, in their belief, they view it as like much more in terms of the negative spirits or dark energy. If there was that sort of aspect, the ayahuasca and these sort of traditions would come in for them to sort of cleanse out the people. And so it's very interesting nowadays of, it's easy to judge different sort of beliefs, but it's very interesting about the intersections between these different beliefs, because there actually does tend to be a lot of commonalities, just different, I guess, language to describe it.
Yeah. No, it is some deep-seated, spiritual traditions there. And, you mentioned the cleanse component, and I think that's what I noticed the most, and the biggest difference between that and, my experience with psilocybin was how it cleansed, not just, physically, but, the emotional cleanse and the spiritual cleanse. I felt, the purging component added a different dimension to the experience itself. Obviously, I think I vomited a few times in psilocybin. I think it was mainly from the nausea of just eating the mushrooms, but this is different. And but there is something positive that comes along with that, extreme violent purge. And I just I can't describe it anything more than like a chakra release, or an emotional release of some sort, where you just feel so good after, when it's all said and done. Well, obviously, because you went through all the work there, but there's something that I just never got that feeling when I left a 4 or 5 hour psilocybin experience. So I think that cleansing component is, I'm not sure if like ibogaine or any of those other ones are similar to that, but there's got to be something to be said about that cleanse component that really adds value to the experience itself, where you leave. Like I felt like, 20 pounds lighter. I probably did lose 10 pounds, honestly, while I was there, but I just felt so good, so light. And I think part of it was just the way we ate and just everything about it. It was just such a cleanse, a detox all around there. So,
Yeah, and your brain feels lighter into, and that tends to be a pretty common thing of the ancient, the indigenous sort of ceremonies. Is there not only with ayahuasca but a lot of others? There's this purging sort of aspect, and it's the difference between sort of the Western mentality where we always view vomiting as bad, and yes, there are, like, obviously if you have the flu and stuff like that, but in a lot of these indigenous cultures, the vomiting is this it's symbolic of you getting out this negative energy or these bad sort of things, and that tends to be a big point of, I guess, hesitation of a lot of people going into this because they hear the horror stories of, having the runs or
right,
vomiting or whatever, and it can be hard, but it also, in the ceremonial context, have a completely different meaning. And like you said, like, that can be the best thing in the world. Like, if you're in ceremony and you have this buildup of anxiety or energy and you purge, like, that is the ultimate release, and
right.
like, you're happy to vomit at that time.
Yeah,
So it's just really being open to different views of how this is. And on that point too is the value, I think, of the ayahuasca is that it brings in the ceremonial side of things.
right.
And there
Yeah,
are
creative.
mushroom ceremonies, but it's been lost a lot. And I do think, in terms of what we need and what we're lacking, are these ceremonies with real value. We do a
Right.
lot of ceremonies with superficial value out of habit, out of tradition, but we've lost as a society these real meaningful traditions and these ceremonies to celebrate it. And I think, especially in small groups, you can speak to it. Like, when you're there with the veterans, when you're there with, we had like a CEO there too. Everybody was connected. Everybody was, like brothers there.
Yeah.
And that's the power of a ceremony.
Yeah. I love the ceremony. I think that's really what separates it as well. Not that you can't do it with psilocybin, but it has lost its, the ceremonial component to it. But I really appreciated how it was, everything about it, how it was, conducted, if you want to call it that, just orchestrated. The Incaros, like the shaman was amazing. Yeah, I don't know what that experience would be like if you didn't do it, as a ceremony. I just feel like it would be so different. But it just adds that extra value and power to it, and it just brings people together. So I think it's certainly lost in culture. I mean, just, even if it's a small ceremony, it doesn't have to be an extravagant thing. It's just, making something official. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're doing it with an intention. And I just love the experience all around. It was amazing, and I can see how this is it was already catching fire, but is going to continue to catch fire, because every time I bring it up now, people are talking about it. You know what I mean? It's like it's becoming a thing. I mean, I guess probably from your perspective more than mine, is just like being able to keep the integrity of these ceremonial. There's this ceremonial component to these retreats and these experiences, because I think as there's these different groups popping up and doing them in their backyard or their garage, and some of them could be doing it well. I mean, but
Mhm.
I think staying true to the actual formula, if you want to call it that, or the true ceremony of this is important, because I think if you lose that, you lose some of the essence of what you're trying to accomplish, right?
I agree. And, like, hopefully, my hope with Heroic Hearts Project is that we do gain enough momentum and a strong enough voice that when this does catch on, and it inevitably will in a major way, that we can at least have an influence in maintaining that, because it is important. And the last thing I want is the rush of people going there to completely demolish this beautiful thing. And it's fine, like you said, if people want to do it in their own way, who's there's nobody that should be a gatekeeper,
Right.
but there should be the understanding of this very traditional way, because it's almost like the plants itself. Like, these traditions didn't just pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
evolved to be the way they are, to be effective, to be beautiful, to maybe linked to things that we don't quite understand right now as we do with psychedelics. We don't necessarily understand all the ways in a physical sense that psychedelics are interacting with our brain. That doesn't mean it's not working. And so I
Right.
think we need to be a little bit more open, especially in the medical or therapy community, that maybe some things that we don't understand right now could have a pretty powerful effect.
Right. Yeah, it'd be interesting how the Western science integrates with, this old spiritual truth almost, you know what I mean? How they are able to make some sense of it all, especially when you talk about like true indigenous ceremony versus more clinical. And I think they're doing that more mainly with psilocybin, and, MDMA is obviously a synthetic drug, but just that integration of worlds, because there's no denying the spiritual component. I mean, I think, yeah, I've actually read somewhere where they're going to talk about psychedelics, but you remove the psychedelic effect of it. So I'm like, what is the point? I mean, you might get some therapeutic properties in there, but I think part of that, the change in the positive, chemistry in the brain and the activation and all that is the psychedelic experience itself. And I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, and how, the challenges of modern Western medicine versus these ancient plants, and what you see the future looking like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think on some sense, I'm not too worried about it as long as it follows a path to where it's not exclusive of certain things.
Right. Right.
Because there is always going to be a market for people that aren't wanting to go into the Amazon jungle and trek
Sure.
down. And, if they want to do it, if they can get some benefit out of going into a clinical setting and taking some psilocybin and go home, within a few hours,
Okay.
I'm all about that. But I
Right.
just don't want it almost like what you're saying in the cannabis market, where
Right.
once like certain medical giants and industrial giants come into it, it changes the landscape for those that are trying to do it
Yep.
in a sincere sort of fashion. And that's the last thing I want. I don't want this to be exclusionary to these beautiful traditions. And in terms of the spirituality, I think it can be a taboo word. It's kind of coming back, but not necessarily in the best way either, because
Right.
now it has completely different, almost like new age connotations, which it has its own thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Hear ya.
to deny that we're spiritual creatures in some sort of level, and again, that term can probably make some people like pause a little bit, but to deny that we have some sort of inclination to think in a spiritual way or have that connectivity beyond what we can explain is, I think it's stupid. We've always had some sort of religious aspect, whether it's animalism or Christianity or just even in Asia, Taoism kind of principle of just this interconnectedness of things and the way things work. It's important. It's how our brains are geared, and you can't necessarily fight against that. But I think, especially, we've lost a lot of that connectivity, and we've become almost egotistical against it, and you can see that in society that something is lacking, and I believe it's that.
Yep.
And I think it's understandable because there's a lot of backlash right now against organized religions and major religions. They took that concept and manipulated it and used it as power, sort of thing.
Mhm.
And so people are kind of going the reverse of, oh, I'm not spirit, I don't want to touch that at all.
Right.
But I think that's missing. I think it's okay to, I don't know what it is, but it's okay to believe in something beyond yourself, even if
Sure.
you don't have a.
Uh-oh. You there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So even something as simple as like when we were there in Peru and we're all in that Maloka,
Yep.
there's this undeniable connection to all of us there, and we come from completely different walks of life, completely different backgrounds, but we were related, we're connected, and that was beautiful. And that is a form of spirituality, just in terms of your
Sure.
family, your friends.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think psychedelics to me prove this more than anything is the connection between not just yourself and the environment, but yourself and your body, and I mean, and the connection of you and the relationship between love and just the energy of love, and how the importance of loving yourself and loving others. And the thing you're talking about is just reconnecting to
Everything.
higher source. It's Mother Nature, really. I mean, we're all part of it. We're living organisms on a living organism. But we forget that. I think we've, in the Western world, almost forgotten that we are living organisms that follow this natural law. And then once you kind of deviate from the formula, disease starts to manifest, whether it's physical disease or mental disease, and this disconnection happens, and the spiritual disconnection. But I think the psychedelics surely, for me, I speak for myself, show that is so ever true, and just the energy of connection that it brings on is so powerful. I think that's what always resonates with me, is how it empowers you as a person, empowers you to love and respect yourself more, but to love others and just exude love and energy, and just connect to the earth. What I mean? Appreciate the things that are around you. I mean, you have to be seeing that, and that a lot of these guys you're probably seeing that just have such a lack of connection, to the real world, and the things that are fundamental to spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them. I mean, that's how you deal. That's how you survive. And
Yeah.
oftentimes in a combat zone, it's you compartmentalize. Because you're under these stressful situations for such a prolonged period of time, and because you are subject to such unusual, traumatic, and horrific scenes and experiences, you have to be very efficient, especially at the special operations level of SEALs, Green Berets, Rangers, Marine Raiders, that you have to be able to cut that off. You have to be able to, like, here's this box, I'm going to put that away. I can't feel that right now. Continue on with the mission. And some people are a little bit better at coping and going back and forth, but it affects everybody, especially if you've been in for a while. That's undeniable, and it's a great skill set for very certain situations, but it was never meant to be under these prolonged uh, time frames, which is what we have with modern war. Of a friend who's also working with Heroic Hearts projects, he's been through 15 deployments. um, that's a tremendous amount of time to be under that sort of stressful situation. But I think that's really where our two communities really overlap too. The athletes and the veterans is in the talks of spiritualization and connectivity, and being a certain person or being a certain character, and then transitioning into this world where you're not necessarily that anymore. And
Right.
it's what both of our communities are really struggling with right now, because you come from this brotherhood or this high octane sort of world where you're connected, you're with the same people all the time, you're expected to perform at this heightened level. You're physically active, you're doing all these kind of stuff, who you are, you're being celebrated, and then you come out on the opposite side and all of that vanishes. Your connectivity, your sense of purpose, and those are all, in my mind, the spiritual sort of sides of things. You come into this sort of like, all right, I guess I'll go back to school and work in corporate finance,
Right.
And that's like a lot of, especially for veterans, and I'm sure it's the same with you guys. You're surrounded by these guys all the time, and obviously you're going to get really close to them given what you're doing. And then you go into the real world and you go into this corporate job, and you're like, don't interact with anybody at your office, or maybe one or two, but it's not the same, and you really don't like a lot of people. And you're doing this job but you don't know why, and then all of a sudden you're just more and more doing it just for the money.
Yep.
And you lose so many aspects of yourself. And I think the psychedelics almost offer we both have these ceremonies at the start of what we're doing. The Army, it's obvious with like the basic training and all that kind of stuff, these indoctrinations, and with hockey, it's all these camps and all these like
Yep.
to get to the higher level. But we don't have anything like that on the outside. You just go from everything to nothing, and I think psychedelics are that ceremony in a lot of ways for our groups.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you talk about ego and, you know, um, the identity crisis that you go through when you transition from something that's, you've identified with essentially your whole life, and say for myself, is I was a hockey player and then I was a fighter in hockey. So I identified with myself as that for a pretty long period of time. And the same thing, goes for you guys is, if you're in the military for extended periods of time, like that's who you are. Like that's your identity. You don't really have an identity outside of that, nor are you really seeking one, right? I mean, you're just kind of in your bubble and you're doing what you're supposed to do and you're working hard and you're doing all these things and you're not realizing how much in a bubble you're really living until that's over, and then you have to find a new way to recreate yourself, or find this new identity. Or that's where I think the psychedelics come in, is that there's this temporary, and this is overused now, the term ego death, but there is one. I experienced at least 5 of them there on the first ceremony, where you're able to observe yourself, without ego and without these, identifications of who you are. And I think that's super important when you're trying to help people find themselves, right? I mean, you need to find definite of purpose, and find that identity that you can actually kind of go back into the world and use that energy that you poured into, whether it's the military, you poured into sports, and pour it into something productive and healing and helping, and whatever that lands up being. But again, to your point there, a lot of people land up just, finding a job because it's filling up time and it's paying some bills, but you're not really doing that soul searching that helps you find where you really need to be. You know what I mean? You're annoyed with your coworkers, and you're annoyed with, with this routine of, that you're not used to. But you're trying to find, the whole idea is to find what you love to do, or what is going to feed your soul and still be able to make some money along the way. Because I think that's what you struggle with. It's in the military, I know you guys don't get paid a ton probably for what you guys do in sports. Some guys get paid a lot. Some guys never actually make any money playing sports, and they get hurt or they never make it. But you transition into the real world. It's like how do you do what you love and make a living doing it, where it can kind of again feed that spirit. And I think I really do believe these psychedelics do offer that type of intelligence, or just helps you shift your perspective on maybe expanding the creative faculties, opening up some ideas, whatever it is, just giving some guys some purpose to send back. What do you observing or you're hearing from these guys as far as maybe something along the lines of that? What are guys, kind of insights are guys coming back with to help recreate themselves, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, well, first on the outside, I think what we're experiencing, both of our groups, because we're experiencing these extreme contrasts of worlds, we're kind of experiencing on the hyper sort of sense of things, in terms of, like vets are much more inclined towards certain addictions, depression, anxiety. But you're seeing this as an epidemic across society nowadays. There's record rates of depression and anxiety, and we're trying to solve it with medication. And so, I'm not one to say that, I don't want to just, airdrop psychedelics over.
Right.
But it's not just these extreme communities either. Like we're seeing a growth in this and a movement behind this, because a lot of Western society is just realizing my 9 to 5 job is just not enough. Like I can't just devote my whole life to a big corporation that I'm not really vested in. I need something more, at least, even if it's just connectivity to myself and the people around me, and I can get that. And I think that's where the bridge is going to happen and push forward. With guys, I think I don't. Sometimes it can be profound. Sometimes it can be kind of like a complete understanding of ways they've gone wrong or negative patterns that they continue to do, and oftentimes that's around a substance or around just getting out of shape or just how they treat their spouse or kids, like a story I mentioned before in terms of appreciation. Others, it's just sort of the much more subtle, just having that little seed, so to speak, to where they can connect to nature, to where they can connect to themselves or joy. That is sort of how they're redefining themselves, how they're getting away from that. They understand that, and they understand that's the story, and this almost just gives them a different lens. For a lot of people, the beauty of psychedelics and the way the process works, especially something like ayahuasca and mushrooms as well, is it has this like zoom out feature. You're almost viewing your life from a satellite,
Right.
and so that helps with the behavior things like I was saying, where you can kind of say like, oh shit, I've been pretty big of an asshole. I should probably change that. To almost keeping that sort of aspect to where you can kind of look at yourself in the third person and realize, oh, hey, maybe I should enjoy this, appreciate this, slow down, love myself more. And I think those sort of baser, almost cliched aspects, like you say, like love yourself and just appreciate the now. It's oftentimes these most cliched aspects are the most
Right.
profound. And if I just told you like, hey Riley, love yourself, or I told Dan to love himself, it would just kind of like you brush it off your shoulder.
Yeah.
Not until you realize that and you discover that yourself, that it becomes, you understand it in a completely different way, in a much deeper way. And that is the bridge, that is almost the Google translation that psychedelics allow you. You
Right.
could say the same sort of like Instagram phrase to yourself over and over again, but it just doesn't translate to your subconscious, to your intuition. And it seems like these substances are that translator to where you understand that finally.
Right. And that's like the spiritual identity that we're really supposed to be seeking to begin with. It's really not an identity outside of us. It's who we are, right? It's love, and that's really what it lands up being, is showing you that it's showing you love, showing you that maybe you're lacking love for yourself, I think, and until it kind of pushes you to love yourself, and just exuding love. I feel like it always shows me that, and I think that is like really the energy that is supposed to be defining us. It's like you either live out of love or you live out of fear, right? And I think, again, trauma and all these things are all connected to fear. And I think that's what I've learned, that it's always showing me, and it's empowering.
Sometimes
But
it has
even
to beat you over
it
the
has to
head with
beat you over the head a
love.
little bit, but then anything you do like in the real world, um doesn't matter, whatever it is. And if you're creative, or if you're a businessman, or whatever you land up doing, your true being is that energy of love. So it doesn't, you know what I mean? It's like that. I think that's the difference between like identity as like identity in a material world, or identity as, as a spirit. I think we've almost severed that, especially in the Western world. They severed the spirit into, a spirit of love, which is supposed to be, into a spirit of fear, and you know what I mean, and almost, hate and darkness. Where that's where I think the psychedelics can help, slap you around a little bit, and bring that energy back, and then you come out of it and it's empowering. I think that's the main thing I get out of it, is just like I feel so empowered to go execute and try and be the best version of me, and be a beacon of energy, which is the energy should be love again. You know what I mean? Everything you're doing, you're just leading through that energy, and it's powerful. I think if you can just take that away, I mean, you go back to the real world, just that piece of intelligence,
It's all
change
you,
your life, change your whole
all you
life.
need are in there. I mean, you can still, and that's the hard part about a lot of this, and that's really what we, with our whole program, is we really emphasize like, hey, life's still going to be shitty. You're still going to get, hit
Right.
in the face when you go back. It's not going to be all roses when you go back. But if you can hold on to at least a few of these tools, then you're going to be much better equipped. It's not that life needs to be stressful. Life needs to have ups and downs.
Yep.
It's how you learn. That's how you rechart your course. That's how it's the whole, like, you can't be happy if you've never been sad. You can't
Yeah.
experience extreme joy unless you've, like, lost somebody and experienced extreme tragedy. It's all the yin yang kind of aspect
Right.
of
Right.
stuff. And so, but if you can remember that, even if in your toughest times, of love yourself and connect to the love and connect to people around you, then that's all you need to continue on to when times get better.
For sure. Yeah. And the lows aren't so low, and the highs aren't so high. You kind of find a little bit more of an even keel approach because, God knows the life is full of adversity, and, it's never smooth, but it's all perspective and how you deal with it.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting, something that reminded me of what you're saying. One of the interesting things that I've seen with ayahuasca and a veteran, a lot of veterans, because they get, in this negative, they're always exposed to negativity and these negative thoughts, and sometimes really bad scenes.
Right.
And so a lot of them just tend to really start interpreting the world in that negative context, and their brain always goes to these negative thoughts. And the interesting thing about ayahuasca, I've seen time and time again, is that becomes the guy's identity, and they don't want to let go of it, because that almost becomes their comfort. Because if they can view the world as negative, then everything makes sense. And if
Right.
they stop viewing that, then their world dynamic, how they structure this artificial world, starts to crumble. And that's the last. Our ego doesn't want that. It won't allow that. So in ayahuasca ceremonies, what happens is they just have these negative sort of things, and the ayahuasca obliges. And so then they just have these really hard ceremonies where it's negativity, and sometimes it lasts a couple ceremonies, and eventually the person will give, because that's all you can do if you're exposed to that. You can't fight against your own mind for so long. You're eventually going to give in to
Right.
that. And so what you always see is they will have these hard experiences, and eventually they're like, all right, I'm done. I don't need to think negative anymore. Like, I'm done with these thoughts. I understand.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
let me chill out for a little bit. And that's exactly how a lot of this works, is you get caught in these thought loops, these thought chains, and they become part of your persona.
Right.
And sometimes you just have to really be like, all right. It's almost like that old thing of, like, catching your kid smoking a cigarette, so you make them smoke a whole pack of cigarettes, kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. No, for sure. Why not? Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, because after the first one, first ceremony there, I wanted to pack it in. I was like, wow, my God, I think I've seen everything. I think I need to sit the next play out. Thank God I didn't, though. But it slaps you around that much. It's like, wow, do I want to go back in that space for another 4 hours, two more times? But I guess that, I landed up realizing it was fear, or just the way I could describe it is just like the hardest training camp, the hardest physical hockey training camp, but spiritual and emotional one. It was just like mentally drained. I gotta go back and do that again. I gotta go fight again or whatever. But
That's what you need for the.
you gotta.
Sometimes you need to struggle. That's how we learn.
Yeah.
If it's all easy, if it was just a back rub the whole time,
Right.
you walk away and be like, oh, this is kind of bullshitty. But
Yeah.
the fact that you have to struggle, that's how
Yeah.
you learn.
That's how you grow. Yeah.
Through
It's it.
discomfort.
That is it. So any studies besides, we'll say besides the one, we can talk about this one as well, the microbiome and the connection between maybe psychedelics, specifically ayahuasca in this case, and the gut microbiome and what you're seeing.
Yeah, of course. The biggest ones right now are obviously MDMA, done by MAPS, and that's showing profound effects on PTSD. 70 to 80% success rate in curing PTSD, which is well beyond anything that I've had before. Psilocybin's obviously getting a lot of attention. It's declared a breakthrough therapy through the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. So both of those are on the track to become legal in the next few years. Ayahuasca is a little bit trickier because it is a compound of these two plants, and there's just a lot of hard things to control with psychedelics in general, and so it doesn't necessarily follow the traditional drug test pipeline model, which hopefully we'll start to rethink because we're obviously seeing a lack there. But within the last year, there are researchers in Brazil that did the first double-blind study around ayahuasca, and they showed it had significant impact for people with treatment-resistant depression. So people who are declared treatment-resistant depression means that they've tried the accepted and the available treatments, and it just didn't have effect. And that's the power of psychedelics. They are taking the hardest cases of these mental health issues and actually showing a lot of positive results.
Wow.
Just in terms of furthering our mission at Heroic Hearts Project, besides for just the testimonials and helping the veterans that we do, we want to have that, we want to be rigorous. We want to have that scientific documentation behind it because it's important. It's important to bring this information out there and understand it more without taking away from some of the other aspects. And so we're working with 2 universities in the US doing some of the first of its kind studies. The University of Georgia, we're doing a major personality change survey of testing people's personalities change before and after ayahuasca over a course of time. We've incorporated into that some biological studies, including what you mentioned, the microbiome. So for people not familiar, within your gut, within your large and small intestines, there's all sorts of microorganisms. It's actually a huge micromass, and they're the ones that digest your food. And your stomach is directly connected to your brain through something called the vagus nerve. And what we are starting to understand more and more is that what you eat and just your general dietary health and the microorganisms in your stomach directly affect your emotion. For some, that's obvious. For others, it may not be, right? So if you have a healthy gut and you're eating healthy and you have the good fauna down there, then that makes you more inclined to, or makes you less inclined towards depression and other things, where they've actually found people with very unhealthy habits. They can change depression, they can change anxiety,
right?
Just specifically through diet.
Yep.
So what we're trying to study is, ayahuasca. Obviously, you ingest it. What effects does it have, if any? And I do believe that there are, because it is, it incorporates all sorts of these plants from the Amazon. There's all sorts of
Right.
stuff
It's
on
got
there. It's fermented a little bit. You have all sorts of stuff going on. So we're doing that just to see how it affects that, possibly how it affects certain markers in your brain. We're expanding, especially in March, to other biologicals. So we're going to be doing some of the first blood tests, saliva, I think possibly urinary tests, and also these portable EKG helmets around a group of 8 veterans that are going in March.
Nice.
And so we're just trying to explore all that, and just, at our size, we're still pretty small, but we can still do these exploratory studies, and it's never definitive, but at least it's taking the steps forward and pointing others with money of hey, this is interesting. Let's
take a look at it. Yeah. No, that's exciting stuff and much needed. But I'd like to think that there's got to be a connection between the gut microbiome and and the ayahuasca, just based on what I know between the food and mood, the connection, and just a simple analogy of eating a cheeseburger and how it makes you feel, mentally sluggish, slow, tired, versus eating a piece of watermelon, or high vibe fruit. So there's got to be something there. I mean, I've seen this stuff being brewed, and this is as organic and legit as it's going to get. So
it's also, when you take it, it's you feel it in there,
Oh my God, do you ever?
Yeah. Something.
That was something else, the taste of that. So you're recently in DC. You want to talk a little bit about what you were doing there? I know it was for everything you're talking about and changing policy, but why don't you give a little bit of an overview of what you're up there for?
Yeah, of course. I was actually there with your buddy Dan, who was also with us in the ayahuasca, and both of you have been great people helping me out and great advocates of all this, and look forward to working with you guys in the future as well. So as many may be familiar, in the past year in the U.S., the cities of Denver in Colorado and Oakland in California, and recently Santa Monica, I think, in California, all had a successful decriminalization campaign. So in those cities, the cops will no longer put people in jail if they have, personal use of mushrooms and other plant-based. These are all plant-based psychedelics, so mushrooms, peyote, cactus, ayahuasca if they happen to have it there. But it's obviously mostly focused on mushrooms because that's the most prevalent one. And it's really under this principle of, hey, these grow in the ground. Who are you? Who do you have the right to like tell us that we can't do this? If you look at the statistics, it's one of the one, like there's no reported deaths directly from the psychedelic ingestion. There's no chemical addiction properties. And as we've been discussing, there's obviously huge medical potential for benefit for people. And so it's just one of those baseline, hey, it grows in the ground, similar to cannabis. Why are you sending us to jail for these sort of things? And Dr. Bronner's, the soap company, who is a fantastic company, a great role model to business structure, to beneficial businesses, has been putting a lot of money and energy for a while, but now much more outwardly towards the decriminalization. And so they're really supporting all these different hubs. So 2020 is probably going to be a pretty big year for a lot of these movements. Recently, we went down to DC. Heroic Hearts Project is helping Dr. Bronner's, the decriminalization movement, on these sort of aspects, just lending the veteran voice to represent those communities and also show the lawmakers that this is not their stereotype. If we say psychedelics, most people are going to honestly view a hippie with dreadlocks or some sort of negative connotation to it. Trying to add a different perspective, the same as you guys are, like, hey, this is affecting athletes, this is affecting veterans, this is affecting people you trust, you respect, and you rely on to defend your country. So why aren't you listening to us now? So this was a first step, but it was a big step. We went down to DC to provide our testimony and to support the motion, and it was in front of the DC board. And the way it works there, it's a little bit more convoluted than other state or other, because it's a district than other places. But the board passed our resolution, which means now that the local movement can start getting signatures towards their petition. So if they denied it, then that means that this wasn't worthy of it going in front of lawmakers. And so then they'd have to probably sue the government and go through this big circuitous path just to get to the same square one. But fortunately, they approved it. And so now in the next few months, they're going to start getting signatures in the local DC area. So if people are interested, they should definitely reach out either to us or Decrim DC. And if they get enough signatures, which I'm sure they will, then it'll go in front of lawmakers and eventually get to a vote and potentially decriminalize plant-based psychedelics and plant-based medicines in the DC area, which would be a huge movement because obviously that is the figurehead of U.S. democracy, U.S. law.
Yeah. Right on. What type of time frame are you looking at for something like that? With everything you're talking about, the process, how long does that generally take? A year?
I'm not super sure. That's not my expertise. I just show up and they point me in the right direction and I talk. But I think it'll take kind of a while. So potentially in by the end of the year, but I'm not positive. Don't quote me on that kind of thing. But there's a lot of other ones. We're working all over the country. Like I said, Oregon's gonna towards the end of the year. Oregon's moving.
They're gonna go full legalization there, right? In Oregon.
And I know Dan's helping out a lot with the Chicago kind of thing.
Yeah.
You have to be. It's probably going to be slower this year as well, just because we have the whole elections thing.
Right.
I know Dan was slowed down in Chicago because you have the coronavirus, and obviously that deserves more attention, the media attention of people.
Right.
So we'll push it forward when it's appropriate, and it's moving in the right direction though, and hopefully, fortunately, all the voices right now that are speaking for it are trying to do it in the most responsible way possible. It's not just like, let's give this to everybody. It's really
Right.
like, allow us to do this. We're therapists, we're lawmakers, we're policemen. This is better for society, and we're going to build the infrastructure to support people when this happens.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I feel like there's such a professionalism that comes along with this movement versus the cannabis movement. I think it's probably because cannabis can be a very daily thing for people, and it brings out a lot of different types of people. Not that some of these psychedelics couldn't be on a microdose level, but it certainly brings out more of a scientific, legitimate crew right off the bat. I think it weans out a lot of these people that really do give it a bad name. There's definitely some of them. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you
Yeah.
can go to a bunch of festivals and there's but that's always. But I feel like it's well represented right off the bat, and it's moving, say, at lightning speed. I know it's slow as molasses in the grand scheme of things, but you look at where cannabis really had no movement for 70 plus years, and then in the last 10 years in the age of information, how it's accelerated, and all of a sudden now psilocybin, we're talking about legalizing psilocybin within a couple of years. I mean, um, it's amazing. It's amazing, but it needs true, legitimate, professional people to represent it, and like you said, in a way where this needs to be very, very respected. You can't have this what lopsided, one-sided angle on when you're pitching this, because it's you got to be realistic, but it's certainly going to help a lot more people than it harms. You know what I mean? And usually the harms related to this is just irresponsible use. It's set and setting that's misused. The dose is misused and whatnot. So I think it's just like anything else. People can abuse anything, and I think that's one of the things we need to be teaching our youth and everybody else is respect. And respect and is a pretty umbrella term, but respecting all substance, whether that's respecting food, respecting cannabis, respecting your caffeine, and obviously psychedelics. But I think once you bring that attitude towards anything, the tool can be used in a positive fashion versus a negative fashion. I think that just I do think the psychedelics, there's so much more mindful than these other things, that it does require some intention to really get into these. You don't just kind of accidentally bump into a shaman and you know what I mean, and start sipping on some ayahuasca, right?
Nor would you want to. That's definitely a bad recipe. In my mind, unfortunately, like, some of the negative sides you're seeing of cannabis is the direct result of prohibition. If it was like any other substance or any other thing, one, nobody would really give a shit because it's like a plant, and it's not, it's not like what they're saying in the 1950s that it, will cause you to kill your grandmother or whatever. But two, on the medicinal side, had it developed in the way that any other substance with potential medicinal value does, is that there'd be a lot more research. It wouldn't be restricted. There'd be government grants and promoting the research. And so, well before it would have been as universal as it is, there already would have been established therapy protocols, or already would have been understanding of the intricacies of it, and the different cannabinoids and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
The problem with prohibition is that it made it progress in an artificial manner.
Right.
No research, to casual use, to all of a sudden we're finding this extreme economic value to it. And so now it's just exploding on a corporate thing, still with very limited research.
Yep.
And almost no, in Canada it's better, but almost no therapy procedures developed around it in the US.
Yeah.
So that lends itself to abuse, that lends itself to figuring out how to self-medicate. It's
Right. Yeah. Oh,
I'm
yeah.
in this world, and I wouldn't, know how to advise somebody on, the proper use of cannabis to help themselves. I mean, I wouldn't, because I'm not a medical professional, but it should be more common knowledge given
Right.
the commonality of it.
Yeah, I know. The whole cannabis prohibition thing is interesting because, like you said, prohibition spun this in an interesting way where, pushed it to the underground, obviously. And these underground growers certainly weren't growing for balanced plants. They were just growing for, the highest THC you could possibly, grow. And then it escalated to, essentially no CBD in these plants. It's all THC. And then, then you have this other side of it, this hemp movement to kind of make up for this, this marijuana movement of, true balanced marijuana. It's not just to get high.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, like it lands up being like that for a lot of people. But I think traditionally, in the natural world, cannabis grows a lot more balanced, right? I mean, it's just like less THC, more CBD, just more of a balanced type of look. But I think prohibition drove it indoors. These alchemist growers are just trying to hybridize these plants into the most fuel you could possibly grow, and
as you would expect them to do. I mean,
as you expect it to do, and
what
then
makes the most sense on their side.
yeah, and then now you're dealing with these these, you say, true medical programs, but it's almost like you got to go back in time now. And you're seeing more CBD incorporated to some of these strains, but now it takes time for the true medical therapeutic values of these plants to kind of come to fruition, and not just I'm coming in and grab some sour diesel. It's like, well, what are you trying to accomplish with that? And and we're just bringing more realistic, say scientific, but it's just more realism into buying cannabis, because I think we've overly complicated it, but almost because we're just doing it, we're growing it the wrong way to start. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're like
it's already artificialized, and so now we're kind of like trying to rebalance it, but we still don't have enough understanding of all the cannabinoids, and so now we're like, oh well, these ones are good, so let's pump these back in. But like you said, like a plant growing in natural, there's over 90 or 100 plus cannabinoids, and they're all evolved to be at certain levels given different strains. But now we're just like, all right, let's do this one. We know about this one, and it even extends itself to. I'm sure you see this with like the CBD market. It's because there's money and there's not a lot of understanding. You'll just go to like a grocery store now, and it's in all sorts of products, whether it is actually in that product and whether it is actually what they say it is completely unknown right now. It takes good companies and people that have integrity, which is often hard to come by, to just want to give a good product. But while the money's good, you're getting all sorts of things.
Yeah, right now, and the CBD has become a novelty. You can throw it in anything, and it apparently increases the value of it tenfold. I mean, but to your point, I think the FDA did a study, and I think 70% of all the CBD companies had some sort of mislabeling going on, whether there was no THC or no CBD in there at all, or smaller amounts of CBD, or just high amounts of trace elements of heavy metals and whatnot. But it's a sexy term. CBD is it's over marketed and right now, and it's unfortunate because people are spending their hard-earned money on these products, and they're victims of good marketing. And there's some people doing it really well, don't get me wrong, but I mean, it's really marketed towards the naive consumer, right? The person that really doesn't read the labels, doesn't really care, honestly. He's like, they go to the grocery store and just buy whatever it says on the front, not even spin the thing around. But I'd like to see some regulation on that, not over regulation, because you don't want to push out some of the smaller guys. You got to give somewhat make it an even playing field, even though that's not reality. But certainly two opposite ends of the spectrum, where one's exploited on one side and one's exploited on the other. And there is a slow marriage happening that I see in the medical space, where they're actually coming around to really understanding that if you really truly want to heal and keep this plant balanced, you have to incorporate more CBD to it. You know what I mean? It's not. I understand some people's pain is extreme, and you got to have those higher amounts. But I do believe, from my personal experience, that they're almost like temporary bandages for pain. Sometimes those high THC ones. You know what I mean? They don't. I think the CBD does help get into the root the root cause of some of this pain, where, again, there's an education component with this, that and trial and error too, right? I mean, you go into a dispensary and they're, Joe Blow bud tenders recommending something that he feels is good for what you got going on, but you might have to dabble a little bit. Again, just that balance component to me is really what's kind of, inducing a lot of this anxiety and paranoia into some of these patients. It's just too much THC, you know what I mean? And bring it down a little bit, and you can
Yeah,
always
for
take
sure.
more. It's hard to overconsume and then reel it back in. I think
Yeah,
it turns a lot
definitely.
of people off. But that's the challenges of this, of plant medicine that's been pushed underground for so long. Is like, it's sad when
Yeah.
guys like me have to, almost appear to be the experts, and it's like it's like when I'm talking to doctors and they don't have a clue. They'll know a couple different, fundamental terms of cannabis, but have zero understanding of botany and, and holism. Really, it's just
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same boat. The Department of Veteran Affairs, I think, had like a around $80 billion budget this year, and we're getting guys that that were failed by the VA.
yeah,
It's
right.
we're I mean, we'll do it, and we're going to do it as professional as possible, and we have experts on our team, but it's always that sort of looking back of like, why am I the one that has is taking hold of this? Why isn't there some
Right.
government organization that's doing this thing that has clear value? It just doesn't make any sense.
I know, but power to you. That's the world we're living in. It's like you take it for granted, I guess, when you're younger. You just feel like, all the puppeteers are doing what they're supposed to, and everything. This is a well-oiled machine for everybody and the best interest of everybody. But the reality is, it's not, and we got to do our part, right? I mean, the system is broken clearly, and we need to be fundamental in fixing it and just do what we can, right? Sharing stories, introducing people, getting the good word out there. Obviously, you're doing it in every which way possible. Political, doing God's work, man. So I appreciate everything you do. Appreciate you. Appreciate the experience I had with you and the fellows there. It was life changing for sure, and highly recommended. Your organization. That specific retreat center. I loved it. I love my experience there. And is there anything you want to add before we say goodbye? Anything in the near future with Heroic Hearts Project, or how you see this thing manifesting in the next few years?
Yeah, I'll say a few things, but one, I appreciate you. Thank you for giving me this platform. It was amazing getting to have that experience with you, and I'm glad to call you a friend now, and to continue on this journey together, and both of what we're doing. I always like, it's the ultimate way to bond, I guess, going to
Sure. Oh yeah.
something like that. Um, but yeah, just on terms in the Heroic Hearts Project front, we are a registered nonprofit 501c3 in the U.S., and we really rely on donations. We are on this like fringe cutting edge, and we're trying to pave this path that is oftentimes pretty treacherous. And so, people's donations or people that can help in certain ways just really helps us. Every single dollar, we don't get paid. All my teams volunteer. It goes directly to vets. Pushing or helping them get to this sort of therapy, and tracking the results. So if you're able to help, it just really helps us out and push this forward. And even if you don't have money, we have an ambassador program that we're trying to develop. So if you have different skill sets, let me know. Hit me up, reach out. If you know a vet and you want to just talk about the potential or the aspects, let us know. We also have connections to other psychedelics if that's kind of more on their line. And just on your front, we're really trying to. We did this sort of pilot program with Riley and Dan and some vets, and it just went tremendously well. And it's a very good group to go forward. So we're really trying to explore in the future this cohesion between athletes and veterans and potentially CEOs of all these warriors from different walks of life getting together, healing and supporting each other in various ways. And so that's what we're trying to expand. My focus on veterans, but working with you guys on healing athletes and healing other individuals, the end of the day, that's all you. That's the best thing ever, you know.
Right.
Things
Yeah, it
that
was
you-
amazing.
And so that's where we're at. And so, you know, we're on all sorts social medias, Instagram mainly, Facebook, Twitter. The website's heroicheartsproject.org. So yeah, reach out if you're interested.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jesse. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you, like I said. Appreciate everything you're doing, and love to connect with you again in the future here and see how you're doing and touch base. But thanks for your time, and we'll be talking to you soon, man.
Of course. Good to see you again, Riley.
Too.
Take care.